This week is Parsha Metzora. It's really the second half. Tazria dealt with the person who gets tzaras. Chazal tell us it's from Motzi Ra, Metzora. Somebody speaks Lashon Hara. And in this week's Parsha, we are introduced to the different types of tzaras and also the purification process. And I always find it fascinating how even in what seems to be the most esoteric or seem to us least pragmatic sections of the Torah, you can have such tremendous life lessons, educational lessons, ethical lessons. So I'm going to give a couple of examples, I think just from this week's Parsha. The Torah tells us that you have tzaras that affect the person's body. You have tzaras that affects the person's clothing. You can have tzaras that even affects a person's home, his house. And the pasuk says like this: "Vaydaber Hashem Moshe v'Aaron lemor." Hashem spoke to Aaron Moshe, saying, "Ki savo el eretz Canaan, when you enter into the land of Canaan, sharani nosen lachem la'achuza, that I'm giving to you as a possession, as an inheritance. V'nosati nega tzaras b'veis eretz achuzaschem. I will place tzaras on the houses in the land of your possession." And then the Torah goes through what has to happen if there is something that looks like an affliction. The only one who can actually say that it's tzaras is the kohen. So the person who owns the house comes to the kohen and says it looks like it's a tzaras, it's not actually a tzaras. The kohen tells him, take your things out of the house, because anything that's left in the house becomes tamei when he declares that it's tamei. So first remove your things, there's a compassion there, and then we'll decide if it looks like it's tzaras. So the kohen will first have the plaster peeled off and see where the area is. Does it spread? Does it return? Bricks will be removed. Eventually, if it doesn't go away and it seems to be getting worse, they will knock down the entire house. So Rashi brings down here, why is it tie in when you come to Eretz Canaan, and this is the land of your inheritance, that you will encounter tzaras abaya? So what's it got to do with this being your land inheritance, coming into the land of Canaan? So Rashi says like this, Rashi brings down, B'sura hi lahem, sha'nagoyim ba'im aleihem. So this is notification that there will be such a reality. You're going to have tzaras of the bayis. And it's not all bad. Why is it not all bad? There's a silver lining. Lefisha hitminu amoroyim matmonios shel zahav bekiros bateyim, that the Amorites who were living in the land before the Jews took it over would hide their jewelry in the walls of the houses, the gold and the silver jewelry. So, Kol Arba'im Shana Shehayu Yisrael B'Midbar, all the 40 years that the Jews were in the Midbar, they were hiding their things there. Al Yedei Hanega Nutat Zabayis, because of the affliction, the house would then be destroyed. Umotzan, and the homeowner would then find the treasures that were hidden in them. Right. So the commentaries actually raise a question. We'll see if we can get an answer to it. The commentaries raise a question. We have a concept that you cannot have a choteh being niskar. A sinner should not be rewarded for his sins. So the concept of choteh should not be niskar. Find that in the Talmud many times. So the guy speaks Lashon Hara. he gets tzaras avayis, and then he hits the jackpot. You know? What's the logic here? That's the question. We'll see if we can get an answer to that question. Before I deal with that, I want to share with you, I've said it over, I think before, a few years ago. Anytime we do this Parsha, it reminds me of a story that I heard on, I believe it was 2004. It was on March of the Living. March of the Living happens right after Pesach. They take Jewish teenagers from all over the world. They spend a week in Poland and a week in Israel. So in Poland, they visit the concentration camps, the death camps. And then we spend a week in Israel. We're there for Yom Yerushalayim, for Yom Ha'atzmaut. So you go Yom HaShoah to Yom Ha'atzmaut. That's the linkage. It's a very powerful experience. And I've written about different things there that teachable moments. But one of the most impactful areas of this is you have, obviously this is to educate the Jewish teenagers, people that don't necessarily have that connection with anybody from the Holocaust, with some of the survivors. On each one of the buses, aside from being a madrich, there was a tour guide and madrich. There's also, unfortunately, there are not many of them left today. Even here in Los Angeles, we lost our patriarch, Mr. Saul Teichman, and there's a number of have been passed away in the last year. But they would have a survivor. So can you imagine you go through Auschwitz and he says, this is my bunk where I slept, and this is the window we crawled through, and this is where my friend was shot. And it's an unbelievable experience. So one of the madrichim is a friend of mine, his name's Mr. Norman Levine. So he told me the most incredible story, and I always think about it when I learn this Parsha. He said that they were looking to get survivors, that they want to get them to come on board, and they found this fellow that was living in Canada, or it was in the United States at the time. And they discussed with him coming on the bus, and they looked, the route that the buses would be taking was not too far off from where his home village, where he grew up. And he said, would it be okay if the bus, that security bus, would just deviate a little bit? I'd like to show the people on the bus where I grew up. They gave him permission, they did it. So they go, this little shtetl, they drive him through, and they could even see, if you go today to Krakow, by the way, you go into the old section of Krakow where the Ramoshul is, and all of the houses, you see the markings of the mezuzah. You see, I mean, they're all now Polish, but you see, mamish haven't changed. So he goes back, he comes to his little house, that he 3 generations, he, his father, his grandfather, they all grew up in this house. And he knocks on the door, just so you can see the marking where the mezuzah was, and this Polish farmer, this guy comes to the door, and he says, I have he explains where it is, I want to show the kids where I grew up, this little 2-bedroom house, whatever it is. And the guy doesn't want to let him in, because they're afraid, they took it illegally. They took, they were just. So I'm not touching it. I'm not taking it. I just want to show them. He finally agrees, and they go in. Like literally, the place hasn't changed in like 60 years. I mean, there's the same chandeliers are there. As I said, and it's very moving. They go into the backyard. There's these little cement steps. These 3 steps, and he tells them, these were cemented. My father, my grandfather made him into the backyard. So then he goes to the owner. He says, listen, my grandkids living in this, I'd like to bring in a memento from the house. Something can I take with me? He says, what do you want? He says, you have these 3 little steps over there. I remember when they made it. means meaningful for me. It's not a few dollars. I mean, what is it? Big deal. She says, no, I don't want to sell anything from the house. And they have this give and take. At the end, charges them like $1,000, exorbitant amount, to pick up this little movable 3 steps that go from the backyard into the thing, and they load it onto the bus. Right? People want like $1,000 to pay for this. But he says it's very meaningful to me. They get back to the hotel that night. They get a hotel in Warsaw. The kids are already have gone to bed and everything. Just the madrachim there. This guy comes in with these 3 cement stairs, and he grabs a hammer, and he starts whacking away at this thing. And everyone thought he spent $1,000 on this thing. What, he's going nuts? Was it getting his anger out? After a few minutes, crack, the stairs open, and there's a bundle inside. And he opens up, and it's full of diamonds and jewels, and all the family has been wrapped. He says, when the Nazis were coming, my father and grandfather made these stairs. They stuck all our jewels in. They said, we're probably not going to live to see this, but you'll come back one day, and you will, this will be yours. You'll be able to take it. You'll be able to get it. Mr. Teichman has a similar story. If you read his book, and his mother's candelabra, they used to hide, by the way, the Jews used to hide their stuff, where are they going to come back? In the basic forest, in the cemeteries, by the family. That's why there's a lot of defilement of the graves. They were searching for the jewels and the stuff that the Jews had hidden there. But he had his mother's ring. There's stuff that he went back and he found. He talks about. I was just thinking like this. I gave this story over at graduation about 12 years ago at our graduation in the Hebrew Academy in Miami to the seniors. It was my senior message to them. And I said, that the way history is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu deals also. You have neshamas. Every child has a neshama, has a gem within, Every generation has to go back and find those souls and polish them, and that's we're searching for those jewels. I mean, that's what we have to go back and, So we maybe learn this thing about them, knocking down the house and finding it reminds me of that particular story. But let's address over here, what's this message that God lets them find the jewels in the walls? So I think there's a very, very important message here. And it pertains to us as educators, as parents, just as regularly, even with peers. One of the most difficult things to do, and there's a mitzvah in the Torah, is to critique, be critical, to admonish when somebody perhaps is doing something that's not appropriate. Because the natural reaction to anybody that we critique or we admonish is always defensive. And in fact, in many cases, it makes it worse, doesn't make it better. Right? You go with someone in shul and you go, shh. Right? He starts talking more. Why? Why is that? What's the pathology? What's the psychology? Right? Why? Why dafka? Because there's 15 people talking on the other side of shul. Right? So why are you coming to me and telling me to be quiet? The answer is very simple. Because you're sitting next to me or standing next to me, you're disturbing my Shemona Esrei. So I'm telling you to be quiet. So the person knows you're not doing this because it's good for me. You're just telling me because it's bothering you. I'll bother you even more. Right? And that's true by any time, whether it's our children, whether it's teachers. If the sense, and this is something that anybody can perceive. If it's because it's bothering you, completely ineffective. So what's the only way to make it effective? Is to let the person feel that I'm not doing this because it's bothering me. I'm doing this because it's better for you. I'm doing this because I care about you, and I don't want you doing something that's hurtful or harmful to you. The question is, how do you do that? How do you give over a message if someone's doing something wrong that he's going to accept it, and it's not going to have the opposite impact, that he's going to do dafka, that he's going to, he'll bother you even more. Right? So obviously it has to be that there has to be a certain level of love and trust and care to the point where the person's open enough to recognize that if you are telling them, it's not because of what they're doing to you. It's not because of what's bothering you. It's because you care about what they're doing to themselves. Right? So that's a very important message. And until we as teachers or as parents have been able to create that level of connection, and even then, it's not necessarily, but otherwise we're wasting our time. Because it's not going to have the impact or the effect that we're looking for. It might have the opposite impact. And even in cases where we're bigger than them or stronger than them or they're scared of us, it's only because of that they're not doing it, but they really haven't changed their behavior in any way. And then, when we're out of sight or when they get older, you haven't corrected the problem. It has to come from a sense of love and care and compassion and sensitivity that they feel we have for them. We've spoken about extensively last week and this week as well that tzaras is really Hashem's response to our speaking Lashon Hara. We spoke about last week what the midah keneged midah and what's the message. But ultimately, when a person speaks Lashon Hara, right, the reason why it's tzaras is like Metzora is like a mace, like a dead person. Because it's the most self-destructive thing that we can do. And we'll see a little later in today's shir. Why? What's so destructive about it? It's really, so it's a corrective measure. Fix yourself. Hashem's sending us a message. Fix ourselves. Starts with a house, then it gets to the clothing, then it goes to the body. Because you're not getting the message. Get the message. Fix yourself. Right? The punishment is telling us we have to correct ourselves. But there's a problem. Just as we critical of somebody else, that their backs are up and they're defensive, and it's because it's bothering me, it's not something good for you. How does God give that message? How does God give the tochacha? How does God give that message that we need to fix ourselves? So God says, you know what? You're going to have to knock your house down. But I love you. You're going to have the money to rebuild it as well. I just want you to do something. I want you to fix yourself. I want to give you, you're doing something bad, you're doing something wrong. How does God get that message across? He shows him that he loves the person. You're going to find the money in the walls that you're going to be able to be okay financially as well. Don't worry about it. But that's the way God gives over the message. And that's a huge, huge message. It's a Musa Haskell for us. Without the sense of compassion, without the sense of love, without the sense of care, don't even bother criticizing or being critical of a person, because mamash has no impact. It won't help in any way. But I want to discuss here and now, get to the depths of the pathology of why people speak Lashon Hara. So I think there's huge, huge insights here.
The connection again between the money in the wall and Hashem.
Hashem is punishing us, but he's showing us he loves us by letting us find the money in the wall when we knock it down.
And what about Motzi Shem Ra? If the neighbors see that I got a tzara, they think that I did Lashon Hara and I did something bad.
Well, you did do something bad.
Oh, you have to do something
You
good.
have to do it bad. It's not if you did something good. It's only if you did something bad. Yeah, it's for Lashon Hara. Yeah. So, what exactly is the motivation of a person speaking Lashon Hara? We know how destructive it is. We spoke last week. It's keneged the Gimel Chamuros, the three most severe Aveiros, Gila Arayah, Shvichas Damim, Avodah Zarah. It's like the most three cardinal sins are all equated because of the damage, the impact. But what's the motivation for the person? The Medrash tells us, the Gemara brings it down too, that L'asad Lava, all the animals are going to come together And they're all going to say different verses. Right? And the Nachash, the Lashon, the Baal HaLashon, the Nachash says over a verse, Shlomo Melech says, Ma Yisron LeBaal HaLashon. What benefit is there for the person who's the master of the tongue? And the Talmud explains what that means. The Midrash says that means that the same way as the Nachash, his punishment was that he has to slide in the dirt. He eats from the dirt. He has no more pleasure from what he eats. There's no pleasure for the person who speaks Lashon Hara. With Lashon Hara, there's no pleasure. Other sins you do, at least you have some pleasure in doing them. Lashon Hara, there's no pleasure. It's the obvious question, if there's no pleasure in Lashon Hara, so why are we speaking? And not only that, the Gemara says an insightful statement. It says like this. It says that miyut ba'arayos, that a minority of people succumb to the desires of promiscuity. That a minority of people cannot avoid the temptations of promiscuity. Rov begezel. Majority of people, when they are faced with the desire of taking something that doesn't belong to them, they will succumb. It says, Kulam b'lashon hara. Lashon hara, we all succumb to. I understand promiscuity, there's pleasures involved. I understand stealing something, taking things that belong, there's benefits, there's a perceived benefit involved. If ma yisra on the Baal HaLashon, there's no pleasure in Lashon hara, how could it be that every single person succumbs to the temptation of Lashon hara? What's the benefit? What's the pleasure? The Gemara tells us in Krisus that the garments of the Kohen Gadol, each one of the Shmona Begadim, of the 8 garments, atoned for different sins. Different sins the Jewish people had, they were atoned by the Kohen Gadol wearing and doing the service with the garments. So, the Me'il, it's a certain tunic that was worn by the Kohen Gadol, had bells at the bottom. The Nishma Kola B'Val HaKodesh. So the Gemara says that those bells atoned for the sin of Lashon Hara. Yavo davar shebekol v'yechaper on the davar shebekol. That which makes noise, which makes sound, should offer atonement for the person who's sinning with sound. We also find a similar concept is that birds are used in the atonement process of the Baal Lashon Hara, birds. You take 2 birds, because birds tweet, they chirp, they make noise, so therefore again, there's those things with chatter should come and atone for the person that was chattering. So the question I heard from a Rosh Yeshiva is a very good question. He says, Lashon Hara, you'd want to define it as a sin. It's not a sin of noise. It's not making noise. In fact, most times you speak Lashon Hara about a person, it's done surreptitiously, it's done in quiet, it's done behind closed doors. It's not something of noise. It's not noise. Why is it being defined as a sin of noise? It whispers, it's Lashon Hara too. In fact, not even that. The Chavetz Chaim talks about all the averos involved in Lashon Hara. He actually questions whether you're allowed to read a newspaper. He says that you're overcome averos of Lashon Hara every time you read a newspaper. And we talked about the idea last week. So that can be even in the written form, it could be Lashon Hara. It's interesting that the Rambam brings down that when a person who speaks Lashon Hara, the Gemara tells us, kills 3 people. He kills the person about who he speaks, the person whom he's talking about. He kills himself, and he kills the listener. It says, but the Rambam says the listener, someone who's listening to the Lashon Hara, he seems to say that's even worse than the person who speaks. Should you understand? Why should that be? Why should the guy who listens be worse than the guy who speaks? Just to understand that. One last question.
Is this really that Olam Haba, the burning the ears of the person that hears Lashon Hara?
Never been there, but but the last question I want to ask is that in the atonement process of the Metzora, they take the blood of the offering and they dab it on 3 extremities: his right ear, his right thumb, and his right big toe. Right? So Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, there's many commentaries on this. He says that the ear is the machshava, it's connected to the brain, it's the thought. The hand is maaseh, is action, and the foot, the right foot, is the derech, the moving forward in life. That all of these 3 things should be focused on doing the right thing. Right? That's the idea. So I want to perhaps share another insight that I had, and the question that my Rosh Hashiva added to, which I think sweetens it and really is it, we find one other time where we do the same procedure. We apply the blood to the 3 extremities. You know where that is? When they inaugurated the Kohanim. The Kohanim, Aaron Avanav, Moshe Rabbeinu applied blood to the ear, the thumb, and the tongue. So what's the connection between this Metzora? That's the purification of the Metzora, and that's what they did for the Kohanim. I mean, why should that be? So let's just review the questions we're asking. We're trying to figure out what the pathology of a person who speaks Lashon Hara. The Menachash admits there's no pleasure in speaking. There's no pleasure in speaking Lashon Hara, yet the Gemara tells us everybody succumbs. There's no pleasure. Why? Right? We want to know why the kapara for Lashon Hara is the bells, because they make noise. Why are we defining Lashon Hara as making noise? That shouldn't be the concept of Lashon Hara. It's like the person makes noise, or the birds tweeting making noise. Why the 3 areas the blood is applied in the atonement of the Metzora is the same as the inauguration, that when the kohen is being inaugurated for service, he's gone through all his training, and now we feel he's appropriate. It's like this is the greatest person to serve Hashem, and yet we're equating it to the Metzora. It doesn't seem to be the... It's like this. One of the most profound desires that a person has in life is the sense that he wants people to acknowledge that he exists. He wants to know that he is there, that he's not insignificant. Everybody has that feeling that, you know what, I don't want to be ignored. I want to sense that I'm contributing, that there's a purpose. It's just I'm not just a waste. People have that very strong need. Now, there's different ways how people express that feeling. The right way to do it is we're all born with certain abilities and talents and unique, is to develop ourselves. A person who develops himself from within and he's able to maximize, actualize his potential, satisfies that desire, that need, because he knows now that he has found his purpose, he's been able to actualize and create a sense of self. Unfortunately, especially in Western culture, people don't develop themselves innately. The way they sense their sense of being is by comparing themselves to others. That's why competition is so prevalent in Western culture. Because the way I can feel good about myself, that I'm important or that I count, is by doing something better than somebody else. So I have to better myself by being better than someone else. That's how I feel that I'm good. Right? Which is problematic, because if you're defining yourself by being better than someone else, first of all, you're not developing and actualizing what you really have. Because you might be only going to this level and not going to that level, because all you need to do is get to that level, and you're better than the guy before. Then you're okay. Right? So it's not a full or true development. And ultimately, also, that's why, even with all competition and everything, it's emptiness, because the person doesn't really, it's not innate. The other way to do it, which is even worse, is by stepping on other people. You push yourself up by stepping and pushing somebody else down. So that's really what the Baal Lashon Hara is trying to do. He's searching for himself. He wants himself to be acknowledged and recognized. But instead of doing it innately, and the way he's doing is taking a shortcut. What's a shortcut? If I can identify what's wrong with everybody else, I'm elevating myself, and people will pay attention to me. We find this, by the way, even with our own children. They can't get positive attention; they just want attention. Fortunately, then they'll go the negative route. Negative attention is still attention. They want attention. Baal Lashon Hara wants attention. That's why it's noise. It wasn't making noise, meaning it's not the decibel level, but it's the sense of people take notice of me. Here I am, take notice of me. That's the idea. Person Lashon Hara is trying to find, he wants people to acknowledge his existence. Which, by the way, is one of the hardest things to do, is forgive somebody who spoke Lashon Hara about you. But if you realize it's not really about you, he's trying to promote himself. You just happen to be the korban. But it's not personally about you per se. It might be a little easier to forgive the person, because it's really about his own shortcoming, and he's trying to elevate himself. It's not really about your own. That's why it's called the davar shebekol. It's like the noise. It's a noise factor. Lashon Hara is the impact factor. Acknowledge me. Notice that I am here. Now it's very empty, because it's not real, which is why there's no pleasure. But we all do it because we all have that feeling. We all want to be acknowledged. It's empty because at the end of the day, that doesn't give you a sense of satisfaction, what you're looking for. Right? I want to feel that I'm here. I want to feel. The answer is no, you have to develop from within. You have to develop it from within. The kohen who's chosen to do the service for his qualities, he's the person that has been acknowledged from within, because he's developed himself within. The message to the Parsha Metzora is, you want to be acknowledged, be like the kohen. Be like the kohen. You don't have to control anybody, put anybody down. Just self. Work on yourself. Develop yourself. Control yourself. Be in charge of yourself. Don't worry about being on top of anybody else. And you will be acknowledged. You will get, the same way as the kohen, who's now chosen to be the holiest person in Klal Yisrael to serve, because he has developed himself, you can do the same. That's the message to him. I was thinking as follows. The thumb, without a thumb, the person is not able to grasp. Can't control anything without a thumb. 40% of our body weight is on our toe. Can't walk, can't control the way you walk, can't balance. And the ear, that's the balance, the source of ear. So this is the areas of control. Control yourself, work on yourself. That's what needs to be worked on. Don't worry about anybody else. Do it on. Then you'll be acknowledged. Then you'll reach the desired sense of people recognizing you, but for who you really are and what you have to offer, not because you put somebody else down, which is meaningless. It doesn't have any... So I think that's the message. Lashon Hara, the idea of Lashon Hara is a person just wants to be heard. A person wants to sense, feel who he is, get who he is. I think just understanding that that's with our children, our students, a lot of times, they're doing it for attention. They want to... Let's figure out how they can feel good about who they really are. That's why, it's the whole idea of competition, 21st century, even grades. You got a 95, you got a 93. So what does it mean? So you feel good that you got the 95 because you got more than the guy who got 93. That's meaningless because maybe you should have done better and you should have got 100. So there are places that are scrapping grades altogether, by the way. There's a system that, the way it's set up, there are objective realities, then there's objective knowledge that has to be known, and a person has to know if he has it. But making competitive, that's why I scrapped the whole idea of valedictory, salutatory. I just think there's no place for that. It puts the emphasis on competition, not on self-development. Education should be more focused on self-development, not in terms of competition. I think, and life as well. It should not be competition. It should be self-development. That's what it should be. That's the focus has to be. That's where a person will really find true satisfaction and fulfillment.